Welcome everyone to the From Darkness to Light series. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm here with Rabbi Daniel Epstein of Cockfosters currently, but very soon of Western Marble Arch. Mazel tov on the new appointment.
Thank you.
And we've got quite an important challenge, I think, to talk about. Shall we zoom in, then zoom out? I don't know if it's the right way around of saying it, but mental health Shabbat, I got an email about it. In fact, I got a few. It's come up in January. I guess we don't know what that will look like shul-wise. But do you want to just talk about what mental health Shabbat is and then the backstory, and then we'll talk about coping mechanisms, if that's okay?
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, Rabbi, thank you very much for having me on. This is really a great, and this program you're doing is fantastic. And following on also from the wonderful Bereshit program we've just come out of a couple of days ago was really lovely, really just enjoyable and enlightening and fun. And that's what it should be. So really, kol hakavod to you and the team for that. That was lovely. Mental health Shabbat, really interesting. Let's talk about it for a moment. I think that it all started really from the first conversation I had when we were interviewing for the position. So we'd got the position, more or less, bar the vote that happens. In other words, they come and see us, they select us, the selection committee will recommend to the board of the synagogue that these are the people we found, and in our opinion, from everyone we've seen, and the remit you gave us, these are the people we would like. So most communities, by and large, will say, well, if they've done the work and they're happy, then we'll be happy. But we'd like to see them in action because, we're not just taking your word for it, although we trust you, we'd like to see. So we came to do a Shabbat, but it was a Sunday. And it was a Thursday evening. We went to visit a group of families, the younger crowd. So the 25 to 45-year-olds, I guess, young families, sort of older singles, and they were all at someone's house. And the house we were at happened to be the house of Laurie Rackhind, who is the CEO of Jamie.
Oh, wow.
And what he was talking about was just in general what we wanted to do, and then asked us questions for us and myself and Ilana. Great evening. And then we got to sort of chatting around their sort of kitchen island. And he was saying, I said, well, what do you do? He says, well, I used to have an engineering firm. I sold it. And now I'm just involved in mental health. I'm like, that's really interesting. And I started to tell him my thoughts on mental health, and that I'd had a conversation with Rabbi Lord Sachs, when a good few years ago, 2008, I think it was. And he said to me, what are the two things you think that will solve the world's problems? And I said, microfinance and self-esteem. Those are the things I just thought at the time. I was reading about both of them, and I thought they would be the ones, if you crack those, then you'll get through most people's challenges and you'll be able to figure out some serious moves on the dial. So self-esteem as part of mental health was always fascinating.
Sure.
So he said to me, well, I'm with Jamie and we're trying to think about it. And what could we do you think, that could sort of raise mental health on the, on the dial? And that's really where the question started. That was 2014. 2016, I'm in shul, I'm listening to the laning, and I see it come out. He comes out of the corner of my eye, wave, hello, how are you doing? He came into the shul. It's not, not necessarily regular, but he popped in that Shabbat. He was there, and it was Parashat Bo, which is the last three plagues. And we're reading through the parasha, and the person who's laning is laning. I don't remember who it was. And all of a sudden, we come to the plague of darkness, and I am struck by this bolt of lightning that I had, like everything all of a sudden fell into place in one moment. I heard the words Vayamesh Choshech, and the darkness was tangible from the word mamash, meaning really you can feel it. And I thought, that's it. And I went running over to Laurie. I'm like, this is the one. I said, but we've missed it. It's today. It's not going to work. I've got it. That's what we're going to do. I've got it. Tonight, I'm calling you. I'm coming over. We're going to have a chat. I figured it out. And that was it.
It's so good to hear about people coming over to people's houses, by the way.
Yeah. That was so nice for me. I got to go to someone's house. I wasn't thinking about it. No mask. Didn't have to sit I was in the garden. We sat on the couch and we chatted. And it was a long conversation, and it came to the idea that we need to create a Shabbat, because that's the only day we can get everyone together. That's really how it started. So we had a whole year to plan, and then classic, it came to October, November, and I hadn't done anything about it. And then we got to the last couple of months, not like you, a year in advance. You've really booked it for next year. And I said, well, what should we do? Let's try our own community, and maybe we'll do Barnet, which is near us, and Muswell Hill, which is just down the road. And we'll do that. But I want to get everyone involved. Maybe we'll have, and I'll prepare some material for everyone. And that's what we did. So we prepared some material, and I figured we'll try it with 2 or 3 communities, but they said, okay, Jamie said, we'll have a go at getting in touch with some of our people. And the first year, it was 80 communities.
Wow.
It just struck a chord.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it struck a chord that we had no idea. I had no idea. And it's because they were pushing it and they felt they pushed on an open door, something to talk about. People were ready. And it was a quiet time of the year. Parashat Bo is always around January, February time. There's nothing really in the diary. It's cold, it's wet. And it's depressing. And that was the moment that we realized that this was it. So that was how it all started. And it's just snowballed from there, which is incredible. And now it's become a date in the diary.
Amazing. No, it's amazing. I just know from Stammer what we've done on Mental Health Shabbat, and it's just it's empowering. It just to give the platform to that. We've also seen people come who don't normally come to shul that often. You know, they will come for Mental Health Shabbat, at least for the program we're putting on. It gives it a real platform.
It's permission. You're giving people permission to talk about something they can't normally share.
Correct.
And that was one of the stories. One of the stories I told at our first panel debate was about our son who was really struggling. He'd just come over from Israel. We'd moved over the year before, a couple of years before. He was not doing well in school. He was a year and a half or 2 years maximum before he was going back to the army. We pulled him out of Israel. Obviously, teenage kids, don't mess with teenage kids. Right? They're on their own path, and you need to guide them and help them, and you can't just uproot them and move countries, unless you have a good reason. And even then, you're going to have to cut them a lot of slack. So we gave him a lot of leeway, and he just wasn't managing. He wasn't managing the schoolwork, wasn't managing the social element. He just wasn't enjoying it. He wanted to be back in Israel, and we brought him against his will to another country, and he wasn't happy, and he wasn't doing well in school. I said, "What would you like to do?" He goes, "I just don't want to continue with school anymore." And he was doing his A-levels. I'm like, okay. So February time, before his A-levels, he's in the upper 6th, he's in like year 13. I called the school. I said, Stephen's not coming back to school anymore. Well, why not? He's not feeling well. I'm like, no, he's done. He said, well, what do you mean he's done? He's got his A-levels to sit. I'm like, he's not sitting then. Wow. He goes, but what will you do without A-levels? I'm like, what most people do without A-levels. And it all of a sudden dawned on me that his mental health at that point was more important than anything else.
Right.
And if it meant he's not going to get A-levels, I'm like, he's going to the army for 3 years. He's got time after that. He may figure it out, he may not. But now's not the time to push him through this academic path, which he's not ready for and not interested in. And he just wants to get back into his head back into Israeli society. So we pulled him out of school. And I remember telling this story, and people came up to me afterwards and said that was quite inspiring, that we'd done something that was against the grain because that's what the child demanded, or what he'd expressed would be make him happy. He went to work in Hatton Garden for a diamond company for 4 or 5 months, had a day job, got paid at the end of the month, enjoyed it, managed to get his head settled, got into the army, did great, and got married, and thank God he's doing wonderfully. So it was a good suggestion, but it was, again, going against the grain to try and figure out what you need, because it doesn't matter what the system is doing, you need to do what's good for you. And that was one of my coping mechanisms that I came to appreciate, is that sometimes what you have to do is going to push you away from the norm or push you away from what's expected. But you can't do what's expected if you're not in your right mind.
Right.
And that's what I think is the most important moment. Once you realize that there's a path we're all on, or we feel we're on, but it's not the only path. And that, I mean, God has that trouble with all of us, right? Right? Yeah. And he cuts us a heck of a lot of slack.
I can hear that well and big,
in the most reverent way, right? That he will give us as much time as we want. The beautiful story of the very last dying breath on a person's deathbed. They say, I was wrong, I apologize, I'm coming back. God literally, he says, yeah, his right hand is outstretched to just bring people back. A whole lifetime, and that last moment is all he's waiting for. So he's got patience. And if he's got patience and he's willing to let us drift in all sorts of directions, because he knows that ultimately it will just take one moment and we'll get it all right, then we have to do the same to ourselves. And sometimes it's ourselves we're hardest on. So that was a really important element of this whole process.
Right. I mean, it resonates with me, having moved, not quite a teenager, but he was 8 years old, my son, when he moved back. By Israeli standards, that's teenager. I remember it's not easy. It's not easy adjusting. It really isn't. And I think the slack is massive. And you're right, not to feel crushed by the system. I think that's very important as well. I guess, can I just move on to one other question?
Sure.
Which I think it's a good look. You're known very much, apart from mental health Shabbat, pastoral excellence. If there was a Nobel Prize in pastoral, I know the sessions you've given in various auspices. I think also to some of the community cares, I believe, about whether it's levias and shivas and visiting the sick, and that whole element of pastoral excellence in the rabbinate. How do you deal with that? It's not easy to genuinely empathize with family one week and then family two the other week, and Levaya. I'm not painting Cockfosters as a morbid community, but Levaya and then a Levaya, then a Shiva, and being there in the moment with all of them, and yet your own life, or your married life, or your professional life. How do you do all of that? What are your kind of coping mechanisms in that realm?
That's a really great question, a really great one, because it took me time to figure it out. I was running myself ragged and into the ground, getting too emotionally involved in the funerals. And sadly, over the last few years, we're coming up on 7 years. Here in June, it'll be 7 years. In fact, in a couple of hours, it'll be 2021. And we're just enjoying ourselves, because we'd be out partying otherwise, but we are sitting here having a chat.
This is the rabbinic version of partying, right? As close as we get.
Here's a coping mechanism, if ever there was one, right? Right.
That's right.
So we're chatting, and the most extraordinary thing was I got too involved in them. I got too emotionally involved. We've had about 320 levias in 7 years.
Wow. That's an average of.
It's high. It's about 50 a year, about a one a week.
Gosh.
Constantly. Some weeks it was 6, and some weeks it was none. And it was just very hard to get into it. And I got very emotionally overwhelmed to start with. And then I realized that I needed time to take in what I was doing. So I would go to the Levaya, I'd drive to Waltham Abbey or Bushy or wherever it would be. I'd do the Levaya, and I'd always think to myself, what would it be like if I was the person who was mourning? What would I remember? What would I want to know? What would I want to feel? So it's not me being the rabbi. It's me just facilitating their mourning. That's it. I have nothing more to do. I can't put myself into that space. I have to actually take myself out of the space,
right,
and be there for them. I have to facilitate. And what I would do is I would leave the funeral and I go straight back to whatever I was doing. I'd drive from Abbey and I go straight into another meeting. I had a meeting half an hour later, 45 minutes later, I'd walk in and I'd just go back in, and it was a disaster. Don't do it.
Really?
I now I get in the car and I drive in an opposite direction. So I've driven into Epping Forest. Yeah, I've driven into Epping Forest, parked the car, gone for a bit of a walk, out in the car, listen to the radio, go to a petrol station, fill up, but I also get coffee, and maybe I'll just sit in the car, listen to the radio. I'll do something, or I'll go for a drive, or I'll drive past my exit on the M25. I'll get up to, go to the exit for Bushy, because, I recognize that exit, and I'll come around again and just drive back. I'll just take the time to let it out. Wow. And in fact, what's interesting is some of my honorary officers felt that I was taking too much time. They just didn't get it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm calling this, and I'm actually at this point, I'm going to pull rank and say, you don't tell me what to do, I'll get it done. Another sense of reassurance, but it was that knowing that things need time. Things need the time that it takes. And that was where this pandemic, I think, has really brought us into this idea of grief. People can't grieve. You can't go and see your loved ones at their final moments. You're not allowed in the hospitals. You can only see them on FaceTime if the doctor on duty has the time, or has the inclination, or has the device available.
Right.
And even then, you can't hold their hand. You can't say goodbye to them. And you're like, what if I catch something? What does it make a difference? They're not going to catch anything. They're in their last few hours. Why can't I just go in? Let me go in.
Right.
And it's just heartbreaking. And then they come away from it. They haven't grieved. They haven't seen them. They haven't said goodbye. The guilt which they feel is overwhelming. And you just have to sit and think for a few moments. How would I feel if, God forbid, I couldn't say goodbye to a parent? What would I feel? Would I feel guilty? And you would. So you have to tell them it's not your fault. You have to go through the motions. And that's what it takes. I think the coping mechanism is put yourself in someone else's shoes and role play all the way through. And what you find is that people need it. In fact, what I'm doing now, and this is going to sound crazy, and I think I'll say this and maybe we won't be speaking much more, but I do video funerals. In other words, I record the Zoom like we're doing now, but I record the Zoom funerals for the family, but it's not just for them. I sometimes sit down and watch the funeral myself afterwards because I haven't had a chance to be at the funeral because I was working the
Wow,
funeral.
that's incredible.
And I missed it. There are some people I got really close to and I wanted to be there for them and be there with them. And I couldn't because I was busy. So I went and I sat down sometimes with a box of Kleenex and I watched my own funeral, as in my own conducted funeral. I've watched how I do it. I've seen some things I could do better. I've seen what works and what doesn't. And as a result of that, I now sort of do I do some commentary as we're walking to the grave. So it's me and the camera, and I've got 50 people behind me or 30 people behind me now, and sometimes 150 on Zoom.
Zoom, right.
And they have 3-4 minutes of educational time where I can tell them about what the cemetery is here for, why it's here, what's the purpose of cemeteries, why are we doing this walk, why did we stop 3 times. I get to teach during the funeral, which is just something I would never have thought of doing had I not been bored myself and holding the camera. I'm like, this is ridiculous. They're just watching me going, I want to be able to do something for them that makes it meaningful for them and is a kavod to the person who we're burying. So you start to think about it. And I've picked up some beautiful ideas. Somebody sings Eshet Chayil when it's a woman after he's finished the Psalms. I'm like, what a beautiful thing to do. So I've picked that up. And I've sometimes mentioned on the Zoom, I picked this up from Rabbi Elchanan Feldman at Bushy, who did this. And I was just so taken by it that I've asked him if I could borrow it. And I do it now as well, because I think it's a lovely thing to do. So I'm always looking to learn. And because I know that they feel a sense of comfort and reassurance that this is done calmly, that's my reassurance. That's my, I wouldn't say payoff, it's not the right word, but that's my satisfaction that I'm doing something well. And I draw a lot of strength from that pastoral care.
Amazing.
So I'm benefiting from it in a way which I need to, because I need to take that with me to the next thing that I'm doing.
Amazing. It's just incredible, totally incredible. It's just inspiring. The 2 elements, we had the family element, and then we had, I guess, the communal one, the mental health Shabbat, and then the personal one. It's just so fascinating. I've never heard it expressed like that before, that obviously you're working at Levi, so to speak, but then, of course, to be one of the people there as well. Even if you weren't working, you'd expect it to have been there as someone close to the family. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And as you said, a very important coping mechanism.
Not to be afraid. Like I tell the families at the time, you can't be, it's not that you can't be too sad, it's just you can't worry about how you're going to feel. Just let it come. There's no right or wrong. People call me 3-4 months later, Rabbi, I'm still upset every day. I'm like, it may last for years. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
As long as you're conscious of the fact that you are upset, there'll be a point at which you think, maybe I should be moving on now and I can speak to someone. That's when you're ready. But don't worry if 2 weeks later you're not back into your job, or worry, in fact, if 2 weeks later you're straight back into your job, because that's not healthy either. This process takes time. Amazing. I think we all felt it with Rabbi Sachs.
Right.
Many of us were shocked, actually, at how we felt. We were bereft. And thank God my parents are alive. But I've watched other people lose theirs. And I never thought I'd experience what it felt like to lose a parent until Rabbi Sachs passed away. And I just found myself weeping all the time. Right. And I couldn't understand why. I'm like, oh, wow. And then all the Mishnah makes sense, right? You weep for a Talmid Chacham, like a sage and scholar, like you would for a parent. And I'm like, that's a very nice thing to say. It's a nice sentiment. But it didn't mean anything to me as a Mishnah until I experienced it myself. I'm like, that's not a recommendation. Right. That's an observation. It's an observation.
That's amazing.
And again, so your life informs your learning. Everything is, it constantly informs itself, and then it all makes a lot of sense. And now I can explain it to you. I couldn't explain it to anyone else. And now I know what it would feel like, I think, for a person to lose a parent, because I felt like I lost one.
Right. I totally understand that. I have to say, I'm going to say the most painful words that I've said probably in the last 2 weeks. And that's that I think we're just about running out of time. I honestly could have gone until midnight, no question about it. And clearly, Cockfoster's loss is absolutely Western Marble Archer's gain. Just thanks so much for the time. I totally appreciate it. It's just incredible lessons and incredible ideas. And I'm sure they'll inspire a lot of we used to say listeners, right? But we shouldn't really say that. A lot of the viewers all of the watchers. Really, thank you very much. And just to remind the audience, as they used to say, you have been watching From Darkness to Light. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. And wishing only good news. And thank you so much.